everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is a weekly update and I have 5 books to talk to you about today that I've finished since last time. So it's generally a pretty good, bunch of books, so I'm excited to talk to you about them. Like always, we'll move from the lowest to the highest rated. And before we get started, leave an apple emoji in the comments to let me know that you're here. So the first book I'll talk about today is a 3.5-star book, and that's All of Us Villains by Amanda Foody and Lynn Herman. So I received this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this comes out November 9th. So this is a YA fantasy where every generation, 7 families compete in this tournament to the death for control over high magic, which is a really powerful substance that's basically thought to be depleted around the world. So this year, a tell-all book has, come out and has thrust the champions into worldwide spotlight. So this was a really entertaining idea. It's basically like, Hunger Games or Battle Royale, that sort of setting with cursed magic. So I thought it was decently fast-paced overall. It did take a bit to actually get to the start of the tournament, and then it does end on a bit of a cliffhanger, but ultimately, I did like the idea of these different types of spells and curses and how there's both common and high magic. So I thought there was a fun variety of spells, and I had a great time learning what each of them does. Some of them certainly come with a cost, so that was really fun. That's always something I enjoy in my books. And essentially, spells have to be crafted with ingredients, and these recipes are hoarded by these different families. And so it's interesting to see sort of like the family's proprietary recipes. I liked the setting too. It feels like a modern world, but, we have this high magic that has mostly vanished around the world except for a few things, so it's a very important substance, certainly. The secret of the tournament has gotten out, and things are just kind of changing after centuries of keeping the secret. We do have multiple sites and relics within the tournament itself, and it's like the boundaries of the tournament area, and each of these have a different strength and weakness, and I thought it was super fun to get to know all of these. We rotate point of view sections between 4 of the kids in these families who are competing in the tournament. So the title I thought was pretty appropriate overall. They're forced to do some pretty awful stuff to survive, and I definitely felt bad for them at times. But it's a lot of are they truly villains or are they just in a really terrible situation? So that was kind of interesting. I have to say, I think Alistair may be my favorite. Despite his reputation as a monster, I think there's actually some depth to him, and he does actually have a heart. Isabel, I'm a little perplexed about her, honestly, with some of her decisions, because I had hoped for something different, honestly. So she's sort of a reluctant champion type character, but she's smart and good at crafting spells, so I liked that aspect of her personality. Bryony is pretty self-confident and has an interesting journey with the book, with learning things. I initially didn't like her, but I think her motivations grew to be a lot more relatable over the book. And then we have Gavin, who is this underdog type competitor. He's really desperate and maybe, doesn't make the wisest decisions at times. So all of them I think have some good moments, but there's also some pretty terrible ones as well. And generally I think I did get a little bit frustrated with them at times, because it's okay, just think about what you're doing. But I think it's one of those things where it can be hard to break away from how you've grown up and, what your family has been doing for ages. So it could be just one of those type things, but I did get a little bit frustrated with it at times. However, I think this was really good overall, and I would definitely read the next one. So this is something I would certainly recommend, especially if you, like me, enjoy a good, magic tournament or just competition element in general. I thought this was a super fun take on things, and I would, like I said, I would definitely read the next one. The next book I'll talk about is a 4-star book, and that's You Sexy Thing by Rambo. So I received this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this comes out November 16th. So this is an adult sci-fi where Nico, who's a former admiral in the Grand Military of the Hive Mind, and her former unit have retired from fighting, and they open a restaurant. Some enemies are still out there though, and our team encounters a sentient ship and pirates along the way. So I'll admit I kept going back and forth between rating this 4 or 4.5-star book, and I think there are a few things that hold me back from rating it that 4.5-star book, but we'll get to that momentarily. So I think this was a really enjoyable sci-fi book. It's less of the Great British Bake Off, that the blurb on Goodreads at least suggests. Cooking certainly does play an element here, but it's not like a competition element. So I was a little thrown off by that, knowing that going into the book, but it wasn't something that really bothered me. The pacing was pretty good in general. I definitely wanted to keep reading and, find out what was going to happen to our characters. The beginning, like the first chapter or so, was a little harder to get into simply because you're, introduced to all of these characters, all these different species, and it's a little bit overwhelming at first, but I think the rest flowed pretty smoothly from there. It definitely gave me Wayfarers vibes with this found family, but it also has some darker moments with things like torture, so it's not like a light, happy book all of the time. Like, there's definitely some fluffy, fun moments, but there's also some heavier themes too. I have to say, just something that I found funny. There was definitely some humorous moments, and the song "You Sexy Thing" kept playing through my head, and there's actually some references to that, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. So I had a really fun time with that. I think the world was interesting. We have this holy hive mind that, isn't the best because essentially it just wants to control a lot of things, and it's not always interested in peace with other cultures. We also have pirates and an empire, but I think some aspects of both of these things are a bit less developed, so I don't have the best sense of these two, cultures, I guess. I feel like, so this is where it holds me back from rating it 4.5 stars. There are some mysteries that are not answered in this book to my satisfaction. So I'm really curious if this is meant to be a standalone or the start of a series, and I can't seem to find the answer to that. So that's kind of why I decided to go with 4 stars, because if it is a standalone, then I think some of this was a little bit surface level and I could have used a bit more. But if it's the start of the series, then that's completely different, then I could temper my expectations, I guess, and know that some of these things would probably be answered in future books. And so since I don't know, then I'm like, I guess I'll just rate it a 4. But I mean, keep in mind, this was a very good book. So I would absolutely read more if it is a series. I really hope that is the case. The characters are pretty great overall, and I think this is another thing where some of them are developed more than others. So Nico, the leader, is really great, and I liked her a lot. She tries to protect her family and did actually rescue them from a life in the hive mind. I think she's always working towards the goal of a better life for all of her people, and she does what she must to keep them safe. She's also skilled in combat, and I really enjoyed getting to see her in action. She's a person of interest in this spiral of destiny that's foretold by Lana, who's the mystic in the crew. I feel like she's going to be an agent of change, and I really want to see more of her adventures. And this is, again, kind of getting back to is this the start of a series or standalone? Don't know. Then we have Dabry, who's Nico's right-hand man, and I really loved their relationship and how he's there to support her. He also loves to cook, and so we get some really great bonding moments with everyone over food and cooking. We have Skidoo, who's a squid person, so I liked her for obvious reasons, but she seems like a really loving individual in general, so I like that. So Atlanta is a newer crew member, and I think she's had a somewhat sheltered life, and I really like seeing her learn more about the world and other cultures. And I think following her kind of allows us to see her embrace other people and celebrate diversity, so that was cool. And then finally, of course, we have to mention The Thing, which is the biological ship. I really liked it, and getting to see it learn more about people and itself. I think The Thing has some of the most character development in the book, and I really just loved its journey. So again, this is one that I debated between giving 4 and a 4.5 star rating, so it was very good. I would definitely recommend it, especially if you liked the Wayfarers books. I think it has a lot of that same sort of cozy moments and found family stuff, so even if you haven't tried the Wayfarers books, I would still recommend this. It's a really easy, quick read, and I thought it was a really fantastic sci-fi. So the next 4-star book I'll talk about is Well Played by Jen DeLuca. So this is an adult romance set at a Renaissance festival where we follow Stacy, who feels stuck in life and wants more. So she ends up starting to exchange messages with Dex, who's her summer fair fling, and, he's pretty easy on the eyes, but they've never really had an emotional connection before. So she's a little surprised by, how tender some of these messages are. When the fair returns, she discovers it's not, in fact, Dex who she's been exchanging messages with, and she's been falling in love with someone else. So I just want to mention a fun side note. It actually mentions the Renaissance Fair in North Carolina, which I was just like, oh, I'm so excited about that. That was really fun. We actually have plans to go to that in a couple of weeks, so I'm really excited about that. I love going to Renaissance fairs, and it's been something, that I've been doing for a while now, and I just love it so much. But anyway, so I think this was a fun romance, but I wasn't quite as invested in it as I was with Well Met, which is the previous book. I think the pacing was good overall. It's very easy to read. It's a humorous writing style that certainly makes me smile. And obviously I love the setting. Like I kind of mentioned, it reminds me of all the Ren fairs that I've gone to, and just makes me even more excited for my next visit, and actually the next book, which comes out this week, and I've actually pre-ordered because I read this book and was like, yeah, I'm gonna need to jump into that next one right now. So I think this deals with a lot of relatable themes, such as, being in your 20s and not really knowing what you want to do with your life and just feeling a bit stuck. And like it kind of mentions seeing a lot of friends who are all getting married and having kids and just generally like transitioning to being adults. And so I feel like a lot of us have experienced that. I know I certainly have. And so I thought this did a really great job exploring this, and I felt really sympathetic towards Stacy. She feels really alone because her old friends have sort of, just become Facebook friends now, and she's not super close with some of her faire friends yet. It also deals with family obligations and wanting to take care of your parents with health, concerns. Stacy's stuck a bit because she thinks that if she tries to move on with the next phase of her life, her mom might get sick again. And generally, I think I mostly like Stacy overall. I can definitely understand where she's coming from and the sadness and struggle that comes with feeling some of these feelings. She is a plus-size main character, so we have representation for that. And I really like seeing her journey and seeing her realize that she has more support than she thinks, and just getting to see her figure out what she wants in her life and going for it. Then, of course, we have to mention Daniel, who is pretty sweet overall. He feels kind of out of the spotlight, especially when compared with his cousin Dex, who's certainly a ladies' man. I can understand some of his motivations, but the romance is, I think, a bit complex simply because we do have this catfishing element, and I think I did have a harder time getting into it. Basically, obviously there's like this big lie with the whole catfishing things, and it's not revealed to Stacy until fairly late. Like, we as the reader know this, especially because it's mentioned in the synopsis, but Stacy does not. And so she, I think, forgives him a little bit too quickly, and it's just generally harder to be on board with this type of romance, especially compared with the enemies to lovers dynamic that we have in the first book. However, I still ultimately liked the romance, and I liked them together. So I think they have some really nice raw moments of opening up to each other, which was wonderful to see. Also, there's a tuxedo cat, which you can kind of see on the cover. He was cute. And I want to mention that we do get to see Emily and Simon again. They're the characters from the first book. And I liked getting like the happily ever after of their romance. And I also just generally like seeing the whole faire family again. It's setting up April and Mitch in the next book, which I'm super excited about. So I definitely enjoyed this overall, would certainly recommend this series. I do think I preferred Well Met to this, but that's fine. I think this was still really enjoyable. And like I said, I definitely want the next one now. So if you're looking for a fun romance, especially one that's set at a Renaissance festival, I would definitely recommend this series. So the last 4-star book I'll talk about today is The Lighthouse Witches by C.J. Cooke. So this is an adult gothic thriller where we have our single mother Liv, who's hired to paint a mural in a lighthouse on a remote Scottish island. But when she goes there, 2 of her 3 daughters end up going missing there. So she learns that the cave beneath the lighthouse was once a prison for accused witches, and wildlings, which are kind of like these fae creatures who mimic human kids, are thought to be created by witches for revenge. So 22 years later, Luna, who's one of the daughters, gets a call that her youngest sister has been found, but it turns out Clover is still 7 years old, which was the age when she vanished. So I think this was a really interesting story with hints of horror and other elements that I don't want to spoil. So I think the pacing was pretty good in general. I was definitely drawn in with like, what the hell happened here? We have 4 different narrative threads, which was interesting. We've got Liv and Sapphire in 1998, which is when, Liv originally goes to this lighthouse to paint the mural. And then Sapphy reads this journal of a guy from the 1600s, so we have got that narrative thread as well. And then finally we have Luna in the present day. So it does shift hints from like first and third person past to third person present, which was interesting. It was certainly noticeable, but I think it wasn't that big of a deal, but it was something that like certainly stood out to me. So I don't know. I don't know if that's something that bothers people, but wanted to mention that here. It was an interesting mechanism. But I think all of this worked really well together with all these different narrative threads to tell the story of what happened to this family. It certainly kept me guessing, and I really didn't expect the direction it went, and I really like this, even though it does have some pretty sad implications. It deals with some tough themes like cancer and motherhood when you're not really prepared to have kids, and also just like being a single mother and struggling to provide for your family. We also have some family members obviously accused of witchcraft because we have, these witches, and There's some pretty horrific stuff in general, so there are some content warnings for child death and torture. This all just sort of feeds into this whole witch hunt mindset, and I think the hysteria that can arise with that. I probably liked Luna the best of all of our characters. She's been trying to find her sisters and figure out what happened to her all these years ago. I felt really sympathetic towards her. She's thrust into a kind of confusing situation when Clover reappears, but she doesn't shirk her duty and takes her in, even though Clover is, acting a bit weird. And there's like, why is she still 7? So Luna seems to be really caring, but she does have some trauma that has affected her, certainly. Liv, the mother, I mostly liked her. She's essentially trying to run away from some bad news and accepts this job, but I think generally speaking, she has a tendency to run away from things, but I liked seeing her have some realizations about this over the book. Safi is a rebellious teenager who does some really dumb stuff, but I think she just wants to be seen and loved, and it's one of those things where it's like, teenage life kind of sucks, and, I don't know, I feel like a lot of this is understandable, even though it's not the best. So she's one where I'm a little bit more mixed on. But yeah, so typical teenage behavior, I guess. Then we have Clover, who's a bit harder to judge because there is some mystery around her for most of the book, but I really liked getting to see her interact with Luna in particular. So overall, I definitely had a good time with this. I would certainly recommend it, and I think it's especially good to read in the fall. So finally, the last book I'll talk about today is a 5-star book, and that's Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper. So this is adult paranormal romance following Emmy, who's a witch who left Thistle Grove years ago because of a complicated family history, and Gareth Blackmore, who is the heir to the most powerful magical family in town. A spellcasting tournament brings her home to serve as the arbiter, which is a family role, and she discovers that Lyndon, who's her best friend, and Talia, who's a member of one of these other witchy families, have also been wronged by Gareth. They ask her if she's in for revenge, and, that's the main question, but it turns out Emmy can't stop thinking about Talia. So I think this was just so much fun, and this was exactly what I was looking for. It was really lighthearted, funny, and super engaging. It definitely gives off some great fall vibes with witches, this magical tournament, and a lot of the setting. I think the writing is quite humorous, and there were several moments where I did actually laugh out loud. The pacing is great. I was immediately drawn in, and I liked both the competition and the romance that we get. I definitely wanted to keep picking it back up. I also really loved the setting of Thistle Grove. It's a pretty small town with these 4 main witch families, as well as some normal, non-magical people who have no clue that these witches are there. So we have family bases. Essentially, there's Camelot, which is essentially a permanent structure for Ren Fair type things. There's apple orchards, there's cozy bookstores and shops, there's a lake, and I just loved all of this and wanted to actually go visit it. Each family has a different affinity for magic. Some of it's nature magic, there's some necromancy type magic, and all of them are supposedly descended from different magic figures and folklore, such as Morgan Le Fay or Baba Yaga. I thought that was really cool. And I liked the variety of magic that we get here and the different traditions of each magical family. Each type of magic and each magic user have both strengths and weaknesses. There's also this really interesting idea where normal non-magical people can marry into one of these families and that gives them magic. And I feel like that's something I haven't seen before, and I thought that was really fun. It definitely deals with a lot of family ties and obligations, as well as finding yourself. Emmy is a great main character. So she left town years ago after a heartbreak and is only back in town to fulfill her family's role in this tournament. So I love seeing her figure out what she wants in life and realize that maybe her actions weren't due to the reasons that she's been telling herself. So I thought she was really funny and entertaining overall, but she's also really smart and kind. She has hurt some people in her life unintentionally, and I liked seeing her reconnect with these people. I also loved the romance so much. I really felt the chemistry between her and Talia, and I really just wanted to see them get together. So that was just so much fun to see. And of course, Talia is also great. I think she's very badass, but she also has a romantic side to her. I loved getting to see more about her, especially when we learned some more about her previous relationships and how that's affected her. I also very much enjoyed some of her family members. They are the ones that are kind of drawn to spirits and darker magic, but the family is all really close with each other. Of course, we should mention Lyndon, who is Emmy's best friend, and she's also quite fun. She's more of this healer type, and I loved getting to see Emmy interact with her again. I think they have the type of friendship where, even though they haven't seen each other in person in a while, they can pick up right where they left off. And I think this is a very special kind of friendship. Granted, it's not without some of the problems, but I just really loved this. And of course, Gareth is obviously a huge jerk, but I liked seeing our characters bond against him. So we do have some representation for characters of color as well as LGBTQ plus characters. I think both Emmy and Talia are at least bi. So we do get some hints of a potential next relationship, which I'm really intrigued about to follow in the next book. And I just absolutely cannot wait for that and to get to return to this really cozy town. So obviously I would highly recommend this book. It's perfect for the fall. If you enjoy, magic tournaments, witches, cozy towns, great romance, yeah, you should be picking this one up. So with that, those are all the books that I'm going to talk about today. I think it's kind of interesting. I went for some more fall type books, but I feel like there are similar threads across a lot of these. Obviously we have some magic tournaments in a couple of them. There's some being stuck in your life and trying to figure out what you want to do. So it's interesting to see how my reading kind of ties in together sometimes. But anyway, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, have you ever been to a Renaissance festival? And if so, do you enjoy it? So I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link's in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.